Hello, I'm Rick, RJBS on the CPAN, and according to my clock it is now 2 in the morning, so I'd like to thank you all for coming at such a strange hour, and I'm going to talk about Perl 514. After Perl 5.8, we had to wait 5 years before we got Perl 5.10. Perl 5.12 came out 2 years later, and we got Perl 5.14 after only 1 year from Perl 5.12. And we will have Perl 5.16 only 1 year later. The result of this is that Perl 5.10 was a huge set of changes. It was massive. Many, many changes. And it's not clear that they were all great changes. Perl 5.12 was much smaller, far fewer changes, and Perl 5.14 ends up being somewhere in the middle. We found Perl 5.12 had fewer changes because we knew we had to get it out the door. We didn't want to wait and wait and wait. And having figured out how to do this, we've figured out now how to get more changes in each release. What we don't know is whether we have found the best rate of change. So we don't know whether the changes in Perl 5.14 is just the right speed, and I'm going to talk about some changes that are good and some changes that are maybe not so good and some changes that we don't know what happened yet. Some of the changes that I'm going to talk about are not just for beginners in Perl, although some of them are great for beginners to know, but everything that I'm going to talk about is something practical. Not strange, unusual, difficult to understand changes. Everything is practical, except for a few that aren't. That seem practical at first, but if you try to put them into use, you realize they're not really such great ideas. Perl 5.16, by the way, should be interesting. If you were here this morning for Jesse, you heard him talk about what would happen in Perl 5.16. And I'm interested to see what really does happen as we find better ways to fit the number of changes we want and to keep things safe for people who are transitioning from older Perls. Perl 5.10 is now end of life. There's no longer any promise that we the Perl 5 porters, will try to support Perl 5.10. So it's a great idea for anyone who is still using Perl 5.10 to try to move to 12 or better yet, 14. We only accept critical bug fixes for 2 maintenance tracks. And that means right now, Perl 5.14 and 5.12. If you are on Perl 5.10, you are not even going to get critical security fixes. And if you are on Perl 5.8, you are out in the weeds. No one even wants to think about Perl 5.8. So it's very important as we pick up this pace of development and are making more and more releases to keep current on the Perl that you're using. And if you can't change what you're using in production, at least use Perl Brew. Gugat was just talking about Perl Brew, an amazingly useful tool for making sure that your code is going to work when you finally upgrade to a modern version of Perl. But that's more than I even want to talk about other versions of Perl. You're here to hear about Perl 5.14. And before I get into the specifics, there is one thing to warn you about. Like every Perl that we've had, Perl 5.14 is almost entirely backwards compatible with previous Perls. But it has some new behaviors, new features that might not be compatible. And some of these kind of changes we get in each new Perl from feature PM. So what happens is you have to say, use feature something. We got say this way, the say like print with a new line. We got Unicode fixes this way. Perl 5.14 does not add any new features. But if you say use Perl 5.14, you will get all the features that we added up through 5.12. If you want to read about what those are, oh my. If somebody wants to correct this projector that I didn't even look at yet, that would be great. I have nothing I can do about it. What you don't see is down here. It should tell you that you can find out all about feature.pm with perl.doc feature. It will tell you what all the features are. And Yes, it would be right under that bubble. So features for stuff that we're adding. But we're also taking things out. After all, we need to make room for the new features, right? One of the things that we've done is start to remove modules from the core. Things that probably should never have shipped with Perl. For example, all the stuff that we said in 5.12 was going to come out, it's gone. And if you want that stuff, you're going to need to go to the CPAN to get it. And is this a big problem? You know, do you need to be concerned about the stuff that we've taken out? Is your code going to stop working because you install 5.14 and you have forgotten to install everything else from CPAN? No. I almost guarantee it's not going to happen, because here are the things that we've taken out. We took out class ISA, which has been replaced by MRO. And if you don't know, class ISA is a pretty weird thing to use to begin with. And if you know what it is, you've probably already switched to MRO. And if you haven't, please do so. We also took out pod planar. I don't think it's absurd for me to say I'm one of the pod experts. And I have never used this. I didn't know what it was until I gave this talk the first time and had to look up what pod planar was. Nobody uses this. We also took out switch, which was very exciting. We were all very, very happy to take switch out of the core, which leads to some of the best bug reports we ever got. Bug reports, for example, that I added a comment to my program and it broke because of switch. And we are taking out next devel dprof, because of course everyone now uses devel nytprof. Everything from the Perl 4 core, like bigrat.pl, ftp.pl, no one's using these. And shell, which we tried to take out before and sort of messed up. So that's gone. We're also getting rid of this. Does anyone know what this does? No, because it doesn't actually do anything. Everyone who's written Catalyst has seen this. You can put an attribute on your subroutine, and it does something. Whatever you want. It's difficult to make happen, but you can. What many people do not know is that you can also put an attribute onto a scalar. This is perfectly legal. I've got a my variable x, which has an attribute. What does that do? I don't know. You can decide. You can write code to make this do something. And if you want to say it has no attributes, you could say my $x equals 10, or you could throw in that colon, my thing with no attributes equals 10. But, you know, that colon equals is a great operator. We haven't yet stolen, we've stolen a lot. We've stolen many ideas from C and PHP and Ruby and awk and sed, but we have not yet stolen much from Pascal. And now we can steal this operator, because this will become a syntax error in Perl 5.14. We've also stopped this from working. This shouldn't be affecting anyone. This looks like perfectly reasonable code, but you really should have these parentheses. This used to just work. It will now just work and say, please add parentheses. This makes the internals of Perl much simpler and much easier for us to maintain. And that's really it. These are the things that we've removed from 5.14. So you should not be very scared about 5.14. It's not going to break things that you've been relying on and using everywhere. Except for one thing. There's one more thing we've taken out, and that is this. You can look at this regular expression, and it looks pretty reasonable until you start saying, wait, this doesn't make any sense, because first of all, there's no n regular expression modifier. And what's that bar doing? Is it some kind of, what's going on? This doesn't look like valid Perl, but of course it is. And what it is this. Because the parser says, oh, there's no A switch, so this must be the start of a new expression. And it parses it as foo/s and bar becomes a function call. This is completely insane. This is terrible. So we have switched this to say, to work, and to give you a warning that you really should put the silly space in there. Because if you don't, it's going to stop working in Perl 5.16 or so. We want to be able to add more and more and more regex modifiers, right? For example, we wanted to be able to add a wonderful new modifier, probably my favorite new feature in Perl 5.14. This is a very common bit of Perl. I want to get a host name and then lock off the end of it. Everybody wants to write this, but it's not really going to work because it's going to modify the host name in place. And, well, it's going to work, but you might want to have the original thing. And beyond that, as a Perl programmer, you don't want to have to write 2 lines to do something this simple. Every Perl programmer knows a program of any complexity can be fit on 1 line. Like this. Everyone has written this. And then everyone has found out that it does not work. Because it does your regular expression match, and it sticks 1 into hostname instead of the edited copy. What you have to write is this. You have to put these parentheses in. And just that little set of parentheses turns it from something that looks easy to understand into something that no one understands. Why are these parentheses here? Is it precedence? Am I changing the context? What's happening? It becomes confusing, even though it's such a simple thing. And it's an easy thing, simple thing. It should be easy for the programmer to learn. In 5.14, we add R. This R modifier on an S expression means return the new thing. Don't edit in place, return it. Everybody else has this. Now Perl has it. I have used this so many times you would not believe it. All the places where I used to make copies and edit them and throw the original away, I now do this. Also, if you have a map expression like this guy, people write this all the time. Totally doesn't do what anyone thinks it should. Because this starts returning, a list of ones. Maybe one, maybe no ones, maybe many ones. But nobody wants ones, they want the new strings. So what you have to write is this. Make the substitution, then return the string. But this is no good, because what this does is modify the strings that are in long names. You don't want to modify the strings in long names, you want to make new strings. So you have to write this. Make a new variable, modify it, and put that in a new list. And this is ridiculous. This is stupid. What you want to say is something very nice and simple. You're saying, make a new list that looks like my old list, but different. Now you can only write this. Map it across this, but instead of having to make a copy and edit it, just return the new value. Again, I use this many times every day. There's also new regex modifiers. This is where maybe we added too many. It's hard to say. It seems like a lot. These are all new modifiers you can use. What they do is change how we interpret the string as bytes or encoded and how we compare characters. I'll explain like this. /L means use locale rules to decide whether the pattern matches the string. When do you want to use /L? Never. /L is always wrong. The simplest, everyone here I think is going to understand why when I tell you, locale rules can never work if you have multi-byte characters. Locale can only work with narrow encodings, or characters that fit in a narrow encoding. Locale rules are totally broken. /U means use the Unicode rules. Use the pattern matching that you get from Unicode. People don't realize what this really means, so let me tell you some of the ones that are kind of scary. \D will match Bengali digit 4. If you haven't seen this character before, it looks like a little wavy line. And it will be matched by \D. So if you think you are validating someone's telephone number with \D, you are not. You are validating a very strange set of input you could get. \W will match the Latin small letter F. F is a funny little squiggle that they use in Icelandic. And if you think you are validating someone's Unix username with \W, you are wrong. And small ligature FF a character that looks like two little F's stuck together will match two F's if you use /I. No one expects these things unless you understand Unicode very well. People think that they're getting something else. They think they're getting something more like /A, which says use ASCII rules. ASCII rules means \D has to be ASCII, 0 through 9. \W must be ASCII, A through Z, and big A through big Z. But here you will still get that two F's matching two separate F's. So \A, not even what people think they are getting. So we have \AA, very ASCII. The very ASCII matching, will also reject the big F, the two F's matching two separate F's. What it says is, do not let an ASCII character in the pattern, these little F's, don't let these guys match something in the string that is not ASCII. But you can still say, oh, you can't see it here, what a shame. You can still say \PL, which is to say a character with a letter property. And the other big shame is there's no subtitles here, which is, what a bummer. There's a lot of work, not done by me, but I'll carry on. \PL lets you say any character that is a letter. It will still match Unicode. Why is this? It's because in Perl, strings are always Unicode text. If you have a string and it is encoded, it's UTF-8 or it's Shift.js, and you try to use a regular expression on it, you are crazy. Because Perl always treats it as if it's Unicode. It's just going to think it's very bad Unicode. So these ASCII rules are saying, please try to interpret my pattern as ASCII. It's not going to affect how it interprets the string, because the string is always characters, it's always text. Now, many people who are asked, well, what does Perl do now? Think, well, of course, what Perl does now is /AA. They think it gets the very ASCII rules. People think that if they say \D, right now it matches 0 through 9. This is wrong. What they get is the D modifier. D for default, the current default behavior, which is going to match using Unicode rules if the string is maybe Unicode, it has been used like Unicode, or the pattern contains \N, or if it's been raining, or if the string makes you feel happy when you read it. The rules are very strange, and no one really understands what D does. If it doesn't decide to use Unicode rules, it will match like ASCII, unless you are on an EBCDIC system. If you are an EBCDIC, it matches using Latin 1. So I like to call these the duh semantics. They make no sense. You always want to use a modifier. Maybe A, maybe U, but you don't want to get D. The only way to match truly ASCII, to make sure nothing here is possibly going to match a 8-bit character, a non-ASCII character, is to throw an exception if you find a non-ASCII character. It's the only way this is going to work. You cannot use regular expressions to enforce ASCII semantics on the string, because Perl never has ASCII semantics on the string. So I've said a lot about Unicode, and I want to move on from Unicode pattern matching because it's a lot of information. But the question is, what should you, the programmer, do about all these Unicode patterns? And unfortunately, the answer is learn a lot more about Unicode. Learn everything about Unicode. And I'm quite serious. You need to always decode the input, always encode the output, and maybe use RE, which lets you pick a default set of flags for everything. You learn to use the \P system for character properties. But almost entirely what you must do is learn how Unicode works. I would be willing to say that among most programmers in Perl, and in many other languages who are working in the large common problems in programming, for most programmers, the biggest issue today is learning Unicode. Because Unicode is the future. We have had Unicode for 20 years, and when you are getting text these days, you are more and more likely to have funny characters in it. Even if you are only dealing with Western characters, which of course is much more likely for me than for many people here, you have to understand how to deal with text. Perl is getting better at it, and so must we. Skip this. To get the changes to these forward slash characters, /A/L, we had to change the way regular expressions are printed, how they turn into strings. We used to say, we used to stringify with these question mark dash. We would stringify to say question mark dash and tell you all the flags that were on it. But anytime we would add new flags or remove flags, this would break any test someone had written to look at a stringified regex. So we have now added question mark hat. And this says the defaults with the following changes. So this is telling us this is going to have the default flags plus U. So if you have written tests that look at your regular expressions as strings, when you upgrade to Perl 5.14, they will break. And once you fix them, they will not break again. And so this is an important slide if you have tests. You need to make this change. All of this may sound like Perl is really bad about doing Unicode. We have all these problems, all these options. There are so many ways to do it with Unicode. But in fact, Perl is very good at Unicode. Unicode is just very hard. Unicode is big. Unicode is complicated. Unicode is many, many, many pages of specification. But Perl is very good at it. I think Perl is the best language for dealing with Unicode text. And so if you are here and learning Perl and learning Unicode in Perl, you have made a very good choice of language. I'll only say a few more things about Unicode. Unicode 6 is now in Perl 5.14. Unicode 6 gets us many vitally important characters, like bridge at night, wildly important characters for doing astrology. All the zodiac characters are finally here. Face massage characters. I like finding all the different versions of this character in different fonts to see how the massage is being given. Man with turban. You can tell stories in Unicode now. The bird is born. The bird begins walking around. The bird finds you. And there are characters for special purposes, like encryption. There are characters for talking about how delicious the blowfish was, and for what happened to the blowfish later. Skip this. Containers. Containers have gotten better. Containers, I mean hashes and arrays. In 5.12, the improvements were local worked in more places. I don't know how many people use local. I use it rarely, but when you have to use local, it is a great tool. Local now works better in 5.12. Assigning to $left bracket is a warning. $left bracket changes the starting index of an array. If you assign to this, you deserve more than a warning, but you get a warning. And you could use each on arrays instead of just hashes. In 5.14, the same sorts of things got better. Local is even better. You can now use local on tied variables and the right thing happens. You can assign to $left bracket in scalar in list context and get a warning. And you can use each on array references. What does this mean? You could write this in Perl 5.12. I have an array, and I'm going to iterate over it, getting the key and the value each time. In Perl 5.14, we could make this an array reference, put our square brackets around it. And we can say each. It looks at it, it says, oh, this is an array, reference. And I can iterate over it and get the keys and values just like this. 0 foo, 1 bar, 2 bas. Great. It means that you don't have to write things like this, where we've got all these circumfix operators, right? Where we have to read things here, outside to the inside, and then left to right. I only like to read things left to right. Some people like to read things in many directions at once. I prefer to stick to one. So this is much nicer for me. Read just from left to right. The problem is, what I said last year was don't use each array. Please, because each is terrible. The way each works is unforgivable. If you try to use each and you recurse, it will break. So why do we care that we can use each on an array reference? Because we can use other things too. We can use push and pop and shift and unshift and splice. All of these things that used to only work on arrays and hashes now work on references to them. Which means all of those circumfix operators that used to make you read left to right and then right to left and then outside to inside, they all work just left to right now. But it's an experiment. It might go away. We're not sure. So play with it. When we have these experimental features that we are only thinking about, the best thing you can do is play with them. Don't put them into your business. Don't use them to make money yet. But try using them and tell us whether it is terrible or great. We want to know how it makes the language feel. These all work by using a new kind of prototype called plus. I'm not going to go into it, but if you like prototypes or really want to see how this all works, go look in Perl doc, Perl sub, and you'll see the plus prototype, which is very interesting. This should look familiar. This is how we write packages with versions now. Package something, our version equals something. In Perl 5.14, you can now write this. Package something version braces. And then put all the package contents into the braces. When the scope ends, your package declaration is done. This looks really nice at first, because, among other things, it ensures that you put a valid version there. When you said our version equals something, it can be any old string you want. And if you look at the CPAN index, you will see the kind of strings people put in their versions. Some of them are really strange. But if you try doing that now, O.2/1 alpha, it is an exception. It will say something like, that's a stupid version number, and die. Which is great. It forces you to do something like this. The problem is, if you're like me, you have to indent. If you put a brace there, it means the next things are indented. And if you're like me, when you want to find a subroutine, you search for the word sub at the beginning of the line. But it's not at the beginning of the line anymore. It's stuck over there. So you're not going to find it. And all of the little stupid one-line programs you wrote to count your subroutines and find your subroutines, they all break. So I cannot possibly use this. But that's okay, because in Perl 5.12, we got this. Right? We got the ability to say package thing version, no braces, and it still validates the version. I'm really looking forward to using this in all my code once everyone has upgraded to Perl 5.12. I'll go quickly through a few things. Because we removed so many modules from Perl 5.14, we could add some more. For example, HTTP tiny. Basically, all it lets you do is get or post requests. Very simple, almost no features, but it lets you do them. And to go along with that, we got JSON pure Perl. Meaning that out of the box, you can write programs like this one, which I will not talk through. But this is a CPAN client in 15 lines. It will use HTTP Tiny to talk to the meta CPAN to find out where the download library is, the download for your distribution is, and interpret the response with JSON pure Perl, and then get it. So out of the box, you could now write simple tools to make the rest of CPAN work. This is what Jesse was talking about, the times they are a change in Perl. The Perl that only has what it needs to make the rest of the Perl come to you. So things like this tiny little HTTP library and this nice little JSON library, extremely useful tools to have in a minimal, small Perl. A few more things that I'll go through lightly. You see here, in fact you can see, it's almost off the screen, we're calling a print method on a file handle. It used to be, to do this, you would have to use IO file. So you could write this traditional Perl program, and if you used auto die, you can drop the or die everywhere. Here, open or die, close or die. With use auto die, it dies automatically. Or we could use IO file and print and close and many other things become methods. But if we use them together, they don't work together. The nice thing is in Perl 5.14, you don't need to use IO file. Any file handle can be used like an object that is an IO file object. So if you open something and then call a method on it, it will use IO file. This is really nice. You can just open file handles and treat them like abstract things. All your programs that do IO can assume that file handles they are given are objects, which means if someone wants to hand them a mock object, a thing that is not a file handle, but is an IO handle, it will work if you write your programs that way. The problem is, auto die is one of my favorite things. Auto die makes an exception throw when you can't correctly print or select or close a file. And it works by replacing open and print and close. But it doesn't replace the methods. So once you use a method on the file handle, auto die is no longer working. So you have to start saying things like close or die. So I really like them both, but because I like auto die so much, I always use auto die and not IO file. But it's good to know about both. $@. Probably the second most common punctuation variable. $_ everyone uses every day, all the time. And $@ you have to look at when something goes wrong. But really we don't, right? We don't use $@ anymore because we're all using try tiny. And if you're not using try tiny, you should be. But the changes I will tell you about to $@ make try tiny much more reliable also. The problem is eval and $@ are terrible, terrible things. They work in the worst way possible. This program here has an amazing bug. And the bug is, let's all look at this program for a moment. We're going to start an eval. I can put my shadow as a pointer here. We're going to start an eval, and then we're going to make an object that is an X class object. And when an X object is destroyed, it does something in an eval. And so we've made this object, and then we throw an exception, and then we're going to warn. Obviously, what should happen is the program will warn death. But that's not what happens. What happens is it warns error, nothing. Because the eval in the destroy of the X object blows away the exception. It's completely stupid. There's nothing that should be blowing this away. In 5.14, this has been fixed. You don't see the payoff, but in fact, it does print the error. You don't lose your exceptions anymore this way, which is going to solve a lot of bugs. Unfortunately, the way this happens is places where you didn't used to have an exception because it was being hidden, now you will have an exception. So your program may seem to break, but in fact, it was broken the whole time, and only now are you seeing that it was broken. A few more things. I have about 4 minutes. We get IPv6 support. If you know much about IP, IPv4 is getting old, but it's not a big deal because we have enough addresses until April of 2011. Far future. But if you are using 5.14, you can prepare for the future by using IP6. A few things I'll run through still. This guy is new. \O lets you put an octal character in and get the octal character you want, which doesn't seem like much of an improvement until you look at how you had to do it before. Before, to put a character in octal, you might have tried this. But this only works up to character 700. So you would not get a heart, you would get I-145 Perl. Because you're getting character 23. I don't even know what that is. Character hex 23. Something that doesn't print. And then the rest. The \O lets you put in an arbitrary size octal number. But the reason it's really important is in regular expressions. I should put this slide on the web so you can look at it for 5-10 minutes and really see how terrible this is. In the first line, the \7 and 10 would throw an exception. Because there is, I'm sorry, the yes, they would throw exceptions because there have not been 7 or 10 captures. In the next line, the 7 would refer to the 7 capture, and the 10 would refer to the octal digit 10. And in the third character, they would both be, in the third line, they would both be captures. So the use of \hex number is completely unpredictable, or it's predictable only if you look at the regular expression closely first. With 5.14, we can now write it like this. \O for octal characters, \G for capture groups. You can be very clear. And in programming, right? In programming, the best thing to do is be very clear about what you want the program to do, and now you can do that. You can now do this, not very exciting. You can write your hex or binary numbers with a capital X or capital B. This is something we stole from every other language on the planet. You can use these very obscure, weird sprintf codes. They refer to C-based sized structures. I've never ever seen these used. I like this question. Does anyone know what this number is? I'll be very impressed. This is the number you get if you seed the randomizer with 1 and you get the first random number. SRAND in 5.14 will tell you the seed it used if you randomize with no seed. It picks an arbitrary number to seed with, and that means if you are doing random-based tests, you can get the random seed it used and print that to make your tests repeatable. If you don't think this is useful, you should learn how to make it useful because it's great. You can write tests that run differently every time you run them. And then when you find a case that breaks your code, you can run it over and over until you fix the bug. Very useful. Okay, here's where you can get Perl 5.14. And if anyone has any questions about any of this, please let me know.
誰か質問がありましたら、日本語でも OK です。
Okay. Thank you.
ありがとうございました。